The combat instruction hall of the Velthary Academy occupied the top floor of the main spire, its walls lined with impact-resistant alloy and its floor mats woven from compressed kelite fiber, materials chosen specifically because most standard composites cracked under the force of a Velthary student's training blows. Instructor Brinsola had taught here for 19 years. He had trained 3 decorated graduates, 2 current officers in the Galactic Interspecies Commission, and 1 reigning Grand Circuit champion. He prided himself on reading every student who walked through his door within the first 10 minutes. The human girl sat in the 3rd row and did not move. Her name was Park Sori. The intake form listed her home planet as Earth, her species as Homo sapiens, and her classification as Deathworlder Class 4. Brinsola had processed the form without pausing. Class 4 was the highest formal classification. He had simply filed it beside 2 other Class 4 designations, a pair of Korthari brothers who had dropped out in the first semester because the coursework was, in their words, not stimulating enough. He had assumed the human would be similar. Large, confident, restless in the way Deathworlders often were. That particular brand of restlessness that read as aggression to most species and as boredom to those who knew better. Park Sori was not large. She was compact, by human standards seemingly ordinary, with dark eyes and hair pulled back in a simple knot. She wore the standard-issue gray uniform with no modification. She sat with her hands folded on her knees and watched the front of the room with an expression Brinsola could not immediately categorize. It took him the better part of the first lecture to identify it. She was patient, not bored, not suppressing aggression, not performing stillness as a kind of intimidation, the way some Velthary students did when they wanted to appear composed. She was genuinely, completely at rest, the way a mountain is at rest, the way deep water is at rest. There was nothing to suppress because nothing was pushing against its limits. Brinsola made a note and moved on. The practical assessments began in the 3rd week. The format was standard. Pairs of students entered the center mat, performed 3 rounds of contact sparring under regulated rules, and were scored on form, adaptability, and controlled force application. The goal was not to win. The goal, officially, was to demonstrate technical understanding of biomechanical leverage principles across interspecies physical variance. In practice, the goal was to win. Cadet Veltorath went first. He was 2nd year, Velthary, and widely understood among the student body to be the best fighter in the program. His record across the previous cycle's assessments was unmarked. He was also, Brinsola noted, watching Park Sori with the particular kind of interest that had nothing to do with academic curiosity. Cadet Park, Brinsola said, you will pair with Cadet Veltorath for the preliminary round. A ripple of attention moved through the class. Heads turned. Several cadets shifted in their seats. Park Sori rose from her chair, smoothed the front of her uniform, and walked to the mat. She bowed to Veltorath. He returned it, correctly, with the precise depth the protocol specified, neither more nor less, which was itself a kind of statement. The round began. Veltorath moved first. He was fast, for his size, and technically precise. His opening sequence was a standard Velthary pressure approach. Close distance, test the perimeter, find where the opponent flinched. Most opponents flinch somewhere. The flinch told you everything. Park Sori did not flinch. She stepped back once, then sideways. Her weight shifted in a manner Brinsola had not seen before, not retreating, not bracing, something else entirely. As if she were redistributing herself, settling into the floor differently. Her expression did not change. Veltorath threw a combination. It was clean work. The class watched and said nothing. She was not there when it arrived. She had not moved quickly, or rather, the movement was not big. It was small and precise and arrived at precisely the moment it needed to. Veltorath's extended reach found only air. His follow-through carried him 2 steps past where he had intended to stop, and in those 2 steps Park Sori was already somewhere different. She did not counter. She simply was not where he had expected, and the absence seemed to do something to Veltorath's rhythm. He reset. He circled. He threw again. The same thing happened. By the 4th exchange, several cadets had stopped writing notes. By the 6th, Brinsola had stopped writing notes. He was watching her feet. She was reading him. Not reacting, reading. There was a difference. And in 19 years of instruction, Brinsola had only ever seen it in practitioners who had spent decades learning to slow combat down inside their own minds until every incoming movement became something like language. Until they understood what was being said before the sentence finished. She was doing it at 22 years old in a student assessment round. Veltorath, to his credit, understood eventually that something had changed. His approach shifted. He stopped committing to combinations and began testing, probing, looking for information instead of openings. It was the correct instinct. It was also, Brinsola recognized, slightly too late. The round ended on the timer. No point had been scored. Not by either cadet. The class was completely silent. Assessment round 2, Brinsola said, because there was nothing else to say. In the second round, Veltorath tried something different. He abandoned technical precision entirely and committed to overwhelming force. A calculated gamble, the kind that sometimes broke through highly technical opponents by eliminating the space their precision required. It was not an elegant choice, but it was an intelligent one. Park Sori let him close the distance. When he was inside the range where his size should have been decisive, her hands moved. Once, twice, 3 times. They were not strikes, exactly. Brinsola, who had studied 17 different combat systems across 9 species, did not have a clean category for what they were. Redirections. Contacts so brief they barely registered, but each one landing at some junction of structure and momentum that Veltorath's body then had to account for. He compensated, and the compensation required him to commit his weight somewhere. And where his weight committed, she was no longer standing. He hit the mat. He was up in a breath. Velthari recovery reflexes were exceptional, but the hit had happened. The class registered it with a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite silence. Veltorath stood on the mat and looked at her for a long moment. Then he bowed. Not the measured, protocol-precise bow from before. A full bow, held for a beat longer than required. Park Sori returned it at the same depth. She returned to her place in the third row and folded her hands on her knees. Brinsola called the end of assessments 10 minutes early. He spent those 10 minutes reviewing his notes and then setting his stylus down and staring at the far wall. He had a question, and he waited until the room had mostly emptied before he approached her. "Cadet Park," he said. "What system is that?" She looked up at him. The patient expression again. "Mountain stillness." "Several," she said. "My grandmother studied 4. My mother studied 3 more. I have been studying since I was 4 years old." Brinsola processed this. "What were you waiting for?" he asked. "In round 1. You could have scored earlier." She considered the question with what appeared to be genuine care. "I was learning what he knew," she said. "You cannot respond correctly to something you have not understood." "And in round 2? He decided to stop thinking," she said. "Once an opponent decides that, the fight is over. You only need to wait for where the decision takes them." Brinsola was quiet for a moment. "You sat in my class for 3 weeks," he said, "and did not ask a single question." "I had none," she said. "You were teaching what I already knew. I did not want to interrupt." He sat with that for a long time after she left. He revised his curriculum that evening, not because it was inadequate for the students he typically received, because in 37 years of studying combat across species and systems, he had encountered, perhaps 5 times, a practitioner who had so completely absorbed the interior logic of violence that they no longer needed to meet it on its own terms. He had not expected to find one in his third-row assessments. He had not expected her to be 22 years old. He had not expected her to be quiet. He updated his intake notes on Park Sori with a single added line. Asterisk recommend advanced independent study. Standard curriculum insufficient. Asterisk. He considered, briefly, writing more. Then he left it. Some things, he had learned, were better understood by watching than by describing.